Hey guys, so this is part 2 of the video I started last week. It's a very long video and that's why I cut it in two. However, I didn't cut it at a natural point, I don't think. So therefore, you should definitely go back and watch part 1 if you haven't watched it. Basically, it would make sense to watch these two parts as one continuous part because the division was a completely post hoc decision and there's no real logic to it. So you need to watch part 1. If for some reason this is the first video of mine you ever watched, this is probably going to be a completely incoherent video to be the first one you would watch. So yeah, go watch part 1 if you haven't. But apart from that, enjoy this part. Now we're going to close up the core subjects. This core subject distinction thing might not be a thing that other people are familiar with. In the UK, core subjects just means the subjects which are like considered really important, which is maths, English, science. And with that said, we're on science. And I don't really have strong opinions about science. I think kind of similar to maths that kids shouldn't start learning it until key stage 3. And that's just because I don't feel like I really remember learning much. So, like, I don't really, for me, again, science seems like something I started learning in secondary school. I don't really remember learning science when I was younger. And I kind of think it's just something which is a bit difficult for kids to learn at a young age. You could maybe rightly criticize me for having a lot of my criteria here be about my own personal experience. But yeah, I personally just really don't remember much of science when I was younger. But I do think that when children get to key stage 3, science should hit them like a bag of bricks. And I think that you should have, rather than just science class, you should have separate classes for physics, biology, and chemistry. This is something in GCSE, if you do triple science, then you do those 3 subjects separately. I think they should just be separate from the start. And for just key stage 3, each of those subjects should have 168 hours. That's 168 hours for biology, another 168 for chemistry, another for physics. And basically, it means that science overall in key stage 3 would be the best represented subject with 12 hours dedicated to it per week. And yeah, basically, I like that idea. So yeah, 12 hours of biology, chemistry, physics. When it comes to the syllabus, I'm kind of inclined to say just keep it unchanged. I actually really liked the way that the syllabus worked when I was in school doing science. Basically, you had C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, and that was the chemistry modules. Then you had P1, P2, P3, blah, 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 that's the physics. And then you had B1, B2, B3, that's the biology. And it was essentially, so it was like you started with one thing in chemistry. So it might be atoms and molecules, and that would be your module. And it would be reactions, heat, radiation, like that's the thing. And it would kind of, each thing would kind of be kind of going up in complexity. But obviously, more importantly, you're just learning more and more. And I like the idea of kind of you split chemistry up into basic things about chemistry, you split biology up into basic things about biology. I think it's a fab system. And yeah, that's kind of how I think they should pretty much keep it. And I genuinely don't really have too much of an issue there. And I do think you definitely need teachers there. I also think there should be kind of online lectures available so kids can kind of go back and refresh their memory. Like you should have, kind of like, I guess they have like Minute Physics. Is that a YouTube channel where it kind of just explains stuff? And yeah, I think you should kind of have for C1, C2, C3, C4, all of that, you should have accompanying videos. So if you want to go back and just remember it all again, you can go back and remember it all again. But obviously, one of the reasons why you definitely do need teachers is because a lot of the time, one of the things for science is the laboratory stuff. So yeah, obviously the labs and experimentation stuff, you're going to want science teachers there for. So speaking of practical stuff, let's talk about sports. I'm just going to say right off the bat here that there should definitely be teachers here because this is a physical thing. You can't learn sports at a computer. You can watch a video of somebody explaining science and learn science. I don't think you can do the same thing as a substitution for PE, physical education, or I'm just calling it sports. And actually, I should give things shout outs when they're changing. Yeah, when I was at school, it was called physical education. I think just call it sports. Why have you got to give it such a fancy name? Also, fun fact: when I was at primary school, instead of English and maths, it was called literacy and numeracy. It's like, okay, fancy. And because it was when I was at primary school, I always found it weird because it was like, I was like, why is there a fancier name for the little kid version of maths? And it was like weird to me that like there were adults or, like teenagers who from my perspective might as well have been adults and they were doing maths. And I was like, why am I like a 6-year-old doing numeracy? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so yeah, sports. Now sports would actually be the most consistently overrepresented subject with 2 double periods a week dedicated to it during every single key stage. So whether you're in key stage 1, key stage 2, key stage 3, key stage 4, you have those 2 periods, 2 double periods, let's say this right. You have those 2 double periods every week. And the reason why it's double periods is because obviously single periods are like when I was at school, you had 1 double period and 1 single period, and it always just made the single period feel completely pointless because it was like you'd get dressed and then you'd go out and you only have like 40 minutes or whatever, and then you'd all have to come in. It was like we didn't really do much there. So yeah, the double periods are always the best. And yeah, therefore I think you should just have double periods again. And obviously that's good for like keeping kids healthy. Now a big change I would make is finding a balance between introducing kids to new sports versus also letting them keep playing the sports they're good at. And therefore, I think one of the double periods each week should be dedicated to finding new sports. So you would just cycle through, you have badminton, all this kind of stuff, and it would be like, these are all the sports you could be doing. These are all the sports, and kids would learn the basics of those different sports, which is kind of how it works currently. When I did PE or sports, we did a term doing badminton, a term doing rugby, term doing cricket, term doing softball. We cycled through, we did basketball, all that kind of stuff. We also had dodgeball. That was obviously the funnest term. But yeah, like that's the thing you had, and I mean, it was all pretty enjoyable. But yeah, basically, you had these different subjects you would kind of just try out. And I think that that's a good system. But I also think that it's worth letting kids build up competence in a particular sport that they're good at. And to that end, I think that kids should be doing like 3 sports which they want to be committed to doing regularly and get better at. The kind of, I guess, classic British combination, I was thinking about it, would be football, rugby, and cricket, because they're all like very British things. But they're all team sports, so maybe you replace like football or rugby with tennis or something. I should actually stress that I like the idea. I'm a big fan of kind of social engineering, all that kind of stuff. I like the idea of really dramatically increasing the resources schools have available to them. And I personally would be fond of like making it so, we're not like kids could do fencing, kids could do martial arts. Like you could introduce all sorts of other different subjects which kids could be doing to really kind of work on getting better at them. And the thing is, kids wouldn't have to like stick to the 3 sports they pick. They could decide like after a while, they could be like, okay, I've been doing rugby for a while, but actually I fancy doing badminton. And if they really wanted to, they could just decide to cycle it themselves. So the idea would be that they're not expected to cycle through anything other than the 3 sports they picked in their second double period. But if they decided like, hey, actually I'm going to drop this sport, pick up another sport, they could do that. However, I think when it comes to the assessment period, when they get a grade in sports, I think the grade should be determined principally by them playing the 3 sports they've done and being filmed doing it. And then the examiners would watch what they're doing and would basically you would get basically an edit of everything the person did during that game. So if it's a football match, obviously, wherever that person is, whether they're in defense or a strike or whatever else, you would get the camera, like cameras from different angles, and you would essentially be able to see everything they did during that game. And the test and the kind of assessment would be that some PE teachers who are good at football would say, okay, yeah, they did a good job there, finding a good position there, or they, didn't do a very good job receiving that pass or controlling the ball there. That was a good shot, like that kind of stuff. And they would, at the end, say, yeah, that was good. That was an A, it was a B, it was a C, whatever else. And obviously, yeah, they would do that for the other three sports as well. And I think that would be a good system. I think that would be a good way of making it so that, yeah, if you're good at sports, you get a good grade in sports. I also think you should probably have like grades for kind of general fitness and strength as well. So, if you're really good at sports, but you can't run very much at all, and you're not actually very physically fit, like maybe you're really good at a sport which doesn't require too much physical fitness, as some of them sort of arguably don't, then that would kind of count against you. And with the strength thing, I kind of like the idea of like you have to actually be at least a little bit buff. Like, I hate to say it, but I just genuinely don't think that like very obviously unhealthy people should be doing well in a subject that should be all about how physically fit are you, how healthy are you. And this leads me to the main point, which is that PE theory was something which we had at my school, which is basically you learn how you kind of learn about sports. You learn different types of kicks you can do in football, different kinds of hits you can do in tennis. And one of the issues with it, one of the significant issues with it, is that it actually creates a system where your entire grade in the current system is determined by PE theory. And that created a system where the boffins ended up getting the best grades in PE, even though they weren't good at sports at all, but because they were good at paying attention in class and learning, and also they had the kind of motivation to focus more on it. So the reality is you had like kids who were actually really good at sports, but they weren't that kind of academic. They weren't really kind of, they didn't work that kind of way. And they ended up getting passes, like just not very great. They ended up getting like C's and even D's. But then the other kids who would be like, oh, I'm going to learn really hard. I'm going to make sure I write down all the muscle groups and that kind of stuff, got A's. And I'm sorry, but I just think like the grade for PE or sports should reflect how good you are at sports. And I think it's a pretty obvious problem with our current system that you can have kids who do really well in sports the whole time and they get a rubbish grade at the end of it. And you have kids who absolutely just flop all over the place in sports and they get a great grade at the end of it. That's a problem. And I want to stress, by the way, I would not get a good grade in sports. Like I'm not that good at sports. I think I lack kind of like situational awareness. Like, I'm obviously decently fit and healthy, but when it comes to football, my feet just don't know what to do. I enjoy playing it. I'm kind of cursed to enjoy playing it, but I get past the ball and just like I literally have no idea how people get tackled in football, because I literally can never do it. I don't think I've ever been able to successfully tackle someone in my life. It's just like I just like see them coming. I'll like stick my foot out, and it's just never even remotely close to where the actual ball is. So yeah, I want to stress I would not get, because I would probably pick football because I would enjoy it, and then I get like a D, maybe even like an F. So it wouldn't be that great. But yeah, I still think that that should be the thing that determines how good your grade is, because that's what matters. How good are you actually at sports? So next, okay, art stuff. And the thing about art, what I mean by this is kind of art, drama, and music. Art meaning like painting, drawing, all that kind of stuff. I think these classes should kind of move around. So you wouldn't have all three of these subjects every single term, but you'd have like some of them every now and then. Yeah, it would be all kind of mixed up. So let's talk about art. And again, by art, I mean like the painting and drawing and that kind of stuff. So first of all, I do want to say that I think art should include a little bit of like teaching about different art movements. Like I don't think that art should just be about how to paint, how to draw. I think it should be about like being able to understand art and appreciate art and kind of like, not just kind of a bit like, literature and media, but for paintings. So obviously the point of literature and media is not necessarily to make it so somebody can write a fantastic book or, direct a fantastic film, the majority of people aren't going to do that. But make it so that when people see a film or piece of literature of quality, they can recognize what it is that's giving it quality. And I think that should be kind of a similar goal to art. And obviously part of that is placing things contextually. So, obviously Cubism, people should be able to recognize, well, this was a particular art movement, this is what it did. And, when you're looking at a Cubist piece, consider the different things that Cubism is trying to achieve and what it is that therefore it might be saying, the different things that can be communicated with these different styles of art. And the historical context of why this art came to exist. And I think this will be really well integrated with, at the same time, kids would work on kind of drawing the stuff themselves. So it'd be like, here's a piece on Cubism. This is what Cubism was, the origin of it, what it's trying to say, what you can kind of learn from looking at different Cubist pieces. Now you produce your own piece of Cubism, whatever that is, so on and so forth. I also do think that there should be kind of something like Bob Rossi in art, because I think one of the things you have to get over with art is the fact that most children just don't have like a natural ability to be good at art. And I know people say, oh, it's not a natural ability, but it is a natural ability. Like there are some people like me who just like, we see something, we're like, that's beautiful. And then we go to like draw it and it's just nothing like it. And I don't believe that it's just like, oh, you just haven't studied enough or like focused enough. No, like the fact that some people can just make what they see in like their brain just like go onto the paper. I think there has to be something natural going on there. And I think you need kind of like some way of making it so that actually kids can see some results. And apparently the Bob Ross thing, like with like the oil paint, you kind of like blends the oil paint together, makes it easier to kind of produce results. So I think that would be a fun thing to do. But yeah, that's the fact that like most people just can't paint and can't draw, I think is a good reason to put the focus on kind of appreciating other people's work and showing like, well, this is how you can recognize that art is good and what art can be doing, and realism versus abstract stuff and things like that, and why it's all pretty cool. Obviously, a teacher is very important for this because it's a very subjective thing. So, well done, teachers. You have a job here. You're hired. Drama. Now, the thing about drama is that I don't really care what's being taught. Obviously, what should be being taught. Acting. How should it work? Probably it should just be incorporated into like different stage productions at the school. So it should be like, hey, we're going to do this particular play. Everybody, here are your parts. Work on acting. And then, yeah, at the end of it, you'd probably do some kind of decent performance. Obviously, there should be some teaching about like the actual, you shouldn't like work on acting. Like obviously you should teach like, this is how you act, this is how you emote. But overall, yeah, I think it's fine. I do think when it comes to the assessment, the final project should probably be like trying to produce a dramatic piece for yourself. So yeah, I think that would be a good thing. And it would definitely end up being kind of a group project. So, because obviously one person, I mean, you could do a one-person play if you felt like it. I think your best bet would be to do it with a bunch of other people and kind of work together. But yeah, then you get a grade based on how good it was. And of course, yeah, again, here, teacher, very important. This is a very involved thing, very active thing. You're going to be very interpersonal. Can't just learn it from a computer. And then there's music. And again, similar to art, I think this should be about teaching different kinds of music, as well as also teaching basic musical skills. So teaching about rap, rock, pop, techno, classical, all that kind of stuff. And then at the same time, also here's some basic musical skills like learning to read music, sight read music, learn scales, learn how to do drums on like a computer program to like place the drums, like produce music, all that kind of stuff. I also do think every student should be expected to learn a musical instrument. And this would at some point, I think, have to become the main focus of their musical lesson. Because it's kind of like one of the issues that I think music class when I was growing up is like most people didn't know a musical instrument. So that always created kind of a limit on how much you could learn music. But I do think that actually teachers aren't that important for learning a musical instrument. I think that a lot of it can be learned, especially once you know sight reading. You can just have your book of different songs and learn them and learn whichever songs you want to learn. And also, heck, if you want to like try and get into like working on your own music, well, that's you're now doing something else, and that you don't even need to have a teacher for that at all. Obviously, that's not something you should have a teacher for. Learning to do your own music, but that's something which should definitely be encouraged, like that kind of musicality that encourages people to come up with their own songs and their own kind of expression. And I've personally found that I actually had guitar lessons, and I always found I got bored because I just like have to learn the same thing again and again, and I just get frustrated with it. Whereas now, where I'm teaching myself, I just think, hey, I would like to try and learn to play this, and I look it up, I give it a shot. Sometimes it's very difficult, so I kind of give up, but then I'll like go and try and learn something else, and gradually I'm building up more skill. And there are songs which I once tried to play, which I was totally unable to play, and then since then I've learned more skills, gone back, tried to play them again, and I've been better at it. So yeah, that's my take on art. Probably the most unnecessary section because I don't have strong opinions about it. But speaking of things I don't have that strong opinions about, let's talk about vocational stuff. So vocational stuff, well, you'll see what I mean. So first of all, shop, which at my school was called Design and Technology. And I don't have strong opinions about this and how it should change, but I think, children should learn certain principles of design and engineering, and then apply these principles in practice to produce things, which is actually what we did at my school. So you learned a principle of woodworking, and then you would produce something using woodworking. It's a good system, actually. And of course, teachers are absolutely necessary here for considering like basic safety and stuff like that. You don't want kids working with saws and all this kind of different machinery without a teacher around. Teachers are 100% necessary. If you need teachers for one thing, you need them for design, technology, or shop. And I think that's what Americans call it, but I think it's a good term. I don't really like this whole design technology thing. Again, I'm just against like this attempt to make things sound more fancy than they are. And on the subject of things sounding more fancy than they are, another thing you would definitely need a teacher for is cookery, or as it was called in my school, food technology. I think just call it cookery because it's about cooking. Now, this one I actually would change more substantially. With the shop, I think can just stay as it is. You go there, you learn metalworking, woodworking, whatever else, and then you just do it. But I think cookery was considered a pretty ridiculous subject. You would just show up with your ingredients, and you would then follow a recipe to exact specifications, and then you would take the food home at the end of the day, and you'd be like, oh, look, I made this. It was a weird class, and it felt manifestly unnecessary. I do remember it. I remember it not being boring or anything like that. It was kind of fun to just get to hang around in a kitchen and cook stuff. But it felt a bit silly as a subject. And the big change I would make would be twofold, which would be, firstly, I think you should alter the syllabus of it to make it a bit more educational, and that it'll be about like other countries' cuisines. So it'll be like, hey, you can learn to make curry with traditional Indian techniques. You can learn like kind of just broadening the mind a bit, because certainly when I was doing cookery, it was mostly just entirely traditional English dishes. And yeah, I think this idea of kind of learning different ways of cooking, different kind of, I guess, almost philosophies of cooking that you can pick up from different cultures would be a very good thing. The second big change I would make would be putting the focus on how to cook and recognizing what kind of different flavors work together, as well as also like different cooking techniques and different like cooking utensils. Despite the fact that we had this food technology course, it wasn't until I started watching, people like Adam Ragusa that I ever learned what different pans did and why you should use a cast iron instead of, whatever else, a non-stick or something, and why it is you might want to use one and not use the other. There's also points about like safety in terms of like how you should cook certain things, what temperatures you should cook certain things to keep them safe. That's all stuff which I feel gets very much neglected by food technology as I was taught it. And I also think, this idea of kind of like different food ingredients and what goes together, what kind of vinegars and flavorings and sauces and herbs and stuff like that. I think getting a kind of sixth sense for that stuff would be a very useful skill to teach young kids. And to be honest, I think like the final grade for this, when it comes to the assessment for a shop, by the way, should just be like, you have to produce something, and if you produce the thing well, you've done well. With this, I think it could include certain things like identifying certain herbs by smell. I think that's a really useful ability. Like if you can identify, oh, this is tarragon, this is rosemary, this is blah, blah, blah. that I think would be very useful in terms of working out what things go well together, knowing that kind of stuff. I think that's the kind of information that would be very useful, rather than just learning how to follow an exact specification to make flapjacks or shepherd's pie. Instead, it's like, oh, I know this is tarragon, this is oregano. These things go together. I know that I can saute it or I can toast it to extract extra flavor. Like, yeah, basically, to be honest, again, maybe teachers aren't actually that necessary, because Adam Ragusa, certainly, who's not a teacher, he's a person who makes videos on the internet. Maybe that's more useful than having a teacher around, but obviously you needed a teacher around for safety reasons. But yeah, that's what I think about cookery, and I think that would be very useful and beneficial to young children. Well, not that young. This would probably be for like Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 students. Oh, there was a smudge on my lens. I don't know if that's better. But next, computing, or as it was known in my school, information communication technology. So in principle, I hate the idea of computing as a subject, because often the justification for like computing being a subject is, well, it's what jobs are. Like, you know, the idea that like computing is like quite a common job, and that's why children should be learning it. And that, as you know, is totally against everything I believe education should stand for. It's also, by the way, what CGP Grey said, that language should be cut and computing should be added to the curriculum. And that was the moment, in addition to CGP Grey defending the monarchy, where I decided that I hated CGP Grey, because his philosophy is exactly the opposite to mine. He's like, well, people shouldn't learn languages because they're not useful, but people should learn computing because then they could be slaves to the corporate masters. Oh, goodness me, CGP Grey. Anyway, basically, I totally agree, of course. I think that, you know, in theory, the idea of computing being a subject kids should learn because that's important for having a job, I think, is ridiculous. However, I do think that rudimentary computer use is a good idea, and, you know, being able to do it is useful. Now, admittedly, I do think that my experience certainly prejudiced people in favor of Windows, because all of my classes were about how to be proficient in Word and Excel. But to be honest, like, actually, lots of job descriptions talk about being proficient in Word and Excel, and it's kind of like, surely that is a good reason not to get Apple. Like the fact that most workplace environments don't want you to have it. I mean, obviously, there's loads of good reasons not to buy Apple. It's ridiculously expensive. You know, they're terrible. You know, like the sweatshops and stuff. But yeah, I have no idea why. Like, honestly, I don't even understand people who have Apple products. Like, I mean, I know people who do have Apple products. Admittedly, the only person I know who has an Apple product, who like I'm friends with, got it at a considerable discount. But yeah, I don't understand people who are like, well, I could get this, but I'd rather just spend more money on it. Like, that's the truth. If you're buying Apple, you're basically saying, I wanted to spend unnecessarily more money on this thing. Okay, fab. Anyway, the thing is, though, that basic proficiency of kind of writing and spreadsheets is undeniably worth learning. And therefore, I think, yeah, sure, something which kind of teaches you how to use Microsoft Word, how to use Excel, definitely worth it. I do also think that rudimentary programming could be used as a way for like kids to kind of express their creativity. Again, I think like teaching kids programming is a little bit like, oh, let's teach them, you know, what the capitalist overlord wants them to know, because IT is such a big part of like the UK now. But no, I do think like if it can be entertaining enough to be worth teaching, while also being not too specific and ambitious, then that might be worth it. I mean, so for example, I kind of learned some programming because like I've have an interest in modding Civ 4. So I kind of learned to mod Civ 4, learned to open up the XML files and like kind of fiddle around with stuff. I don't know if that's really considered programming, but you know, like it was a specific thing. But the thing is, I enjoyed doing that. Like that's why I did it. But obviously, I don't think every single kid should learn to mod Civ 4. So it does create an issue. I think maybe teaching kids to mod a game might be a good module for like computing. So it's like, today we're going to, and you know, you could maybe like the government could license a game, could be like, hey, you know, let's pick a particular game and we're going to say, okay, kids, mod it. That's your job. You're going to, you know, we're going to teach you to look at the game files, look into it, and actually like fiddle around with it to make it different from how it is. That would be really cool. So yeah, maybe that would be a fun thing to do. Ironically, though, my own lack of knowledge about computers is meaning that I can't really fully work out what it is I think kids should be learning. But I think that's a good example, yeah, like kind of maybe Grand Theft Auto or something. Well, maybe not that, because that might be a bit inappropriate. FIFA, for example, you could just say, okay, except I bet EA games wouldn't go along with that. But hypothetically speaking, let's say the government says, okay, we want to use FIFA to teach kids how to mod things. So basically, and then, somebody agrees with it. If not, I guess the government's just going to have to establish a gaming division of BBC, and therefore whatever game ends up being produced there, they would have the right to use. And then, kids would just be like, okay, mod it in this particular way. I think that would be pretty fun. I don't think teachers are quite as necessary here as they would be for example, cooking or a shop. And the reason why is because computers are the obvious alternative to teachers. Like, when I talked about like not needing teachers for maths, what was I thinking about replacing them with? Computers. And here, of course, you have computers that are already there by definition. And in theory, you could set it up so like there's just tasks that people need to do, and then there can be like explanatory videos, and then they just send off the stuff when they're done. I actually like my experience of ICT, and it was actually quite fun, or computing, was that basically you pretty much did. It was almost a bit like working, but it was kind of like working in a way which I think made sense, which is you basically had certain tasks you need to do. And then you just once you complete the task, you just put them on the desk of the teacher, like, hey, I did this task. And then they'd mark it and say, yeah, good, you did a good job doing that task. And then that's kind of how you got your grade, by doing the certain tasks. I think that's kind of a good system. So yeah, like teacher would just say, okay, these are your tasks. These are the things you need to do. And I kind of do like the idea of you can do them in your own. And that's pretty much what we had, actually. We had an idea of like, you could do them in your own time. Like, it wasn't like you had to have done every single task within each lesson. It was kind of like, hey, if you had spillover, and they even were like, hey, if you need to come in during your breaks to actually, like do more of it, then we could do that and get a better grade from it. But yeah, I think that that's a perfectly good system. So now let's see if we can do humanities before my camera runs out of battery again. Let's see if we can do it before my brain runs out of battery. Hey, humanities. So we left the biggest one to last, which kind of sucks. So earlier when I told you to put a pin in people being able to choose to do extra lessons, it was quite a while ago at this point, but I hope you remember it. Well, that actually applies to almost every single subject in Key Stage 4, because actually that's how it is right now in the UK in Key Stage 4. When I was 14, 15, I got to start varying the subjects I took according to my preferences. I could have chosen different things to pursue. I ended up, for example, choosing to put a focus on maths, geography, and computing, as it happened. The thing about the computing thing is I didn't actually do it because I had an interest in computing. I did it because it felt like just a kind of normal subject. That might sound a bit weird, but it's kind of, I was just like, yeah, I should just do computing. Anyway, in hindsight, I probably could have picked something else, but I didn't. But yeah, that's the thing. I was able to start varying it. And I do think that by Key Stage 4, kids who want to do more shop should be able to do more shop. Kids who really like drama should be able to do more drama. Like, basically, kids should be able to start saying, I really like this subject, so I want to start pursuing this subject. And a basic system for kind of how this will work, which to an extent is what we kind of had when I was at school, but I think it should be taken kind of to the next level, involves kind of like 3 different sort of categories of different modules. The first would be mandatory, like things you absolutely have to do. So a lot of the maths, science, and English would just be totally unambiguously mandatory. You can't back out of it. You can't back out of learning basic grammar. You can't back out of learning trigonometry. You can't back out of chemistry and physics and whatever else. But the second would be semi-mandatory. And what I mean by that is things where you have like a limited option and you have to pick something, but you choose what. So, for example, literature and media, you have to do a novel. You have to do a great novel, but you can choose what great novel you do. So it's not like you can just say, I don't fancy doing it at all, but you at least have an option within the limited option. And then the third option would be totally optional, where there's no kind of select grouping of stuff. It's just a complete free-for-all. It's not like you have to pick a language, or you have to pick a history module, or you have to pick a science module. It's just, you can just pick pretty much anything. And yeah, that I think is the basic kind of 3 categories. I should explain modules, by the way, especially how I'm using the term. So since each half term is 7 weeks long, every single one, each module would have 1 lesson per week dedicated to it, meaning, and it would last for one half term, meaning it would be 7 lessons. So each module would contain 7 lessons worth of stuff. Now, all of this is really important when we get onto humanities, because humanities will be heavily optional, and optional much earlier on. Students will start to get making these choices in Key Stage 3. So for most of the time, like children really start making choices in Key Stage 4. Here it's like Key Stage 3. So first of all, I just want to like really quickly blast through all of the subjects in humanities that I think are worth being aware that I would consider. It actually works out being perfectly 15. So are you ready for this? Anthropology, business studies, economics, finance, gender studies, geography, history, law, linguistics, philosophy, politics, psychology, social education, sociology, and theology. Okay, quick thing. You may have noticed I said gender studies here. There's 2 things to consider there. First thing is that this shows how interesting I find this idea of curriculum reform, because the reason why it says gender studies there is because that is something, all of this stuff that I'm talking to you now is almost entirely stuff which I came up with years ago, back when I was at university and before I started becoming gender critical. So I just put gender studies. But what I really, now I'm still happy putting gender studies there, because what I would mean when I say gender studies is kind of more like women's studies, but obviously it's not just women, but basically exploring the idea of gender, exploring the idea of, so not like nonsense made up gender identities, but gender is like a facet of the human experience. So I don't have a problem with talking about gender and teaching about gender and studying gender. I think currently gender studies is a load of nonsense with all of the made up gender identities, but I actually do think gender studies would be a perfectly legitimate subject for children to have. Now, an example of something that would be 100% mandatory in that kind of list of things would be social education, which basically, at my school, it was called PSHE, which stood for Personal, Social, and Health Education. And it was things like sex ed, things like not doing drugs, basically the kind of like how to be a good person kind of sort of thing. But the thing is, it's all stuff which is really important. Obviously, sex ed, really important. Not doing drugs, really important. It should be mandatory. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't just fill it up with modules. Indeed, really, I don't think there'd be that many modules necessary for social education, but every single module should be really important. It's not, it should be like, hey, do you want to learn about how drugs are bad, or do you not want to learn about it? No, you have to learn about it. And then, of course, kind of different from that, you might have finance, where I think some of it should be mandatory, like the basics of kind of personal finance and, knowing some of that stuff, but like more specific stuff, maybe for somebody who's interested in like finance as a potential career path, and maybe they'll find that really interesting. That would be an option which not everybody should be expected to do. Basically, almost every single subject would have a degree of kind of semi-mandatory structure to it, where you have to do at least one module. So you'd have to do like one philosophy module, one linguistics module, one law module. Like basically, this would be to give kids like a broad idea of what the different things there are that they can learn about. So every single kid would learn something in psychology, something in theology, something in economics. They would at least have to go through those 7 lessons, that one module, but they can kind of choose within that which module they want to pursue, which module seems interesting to them. And of course, some of the subjects are kind of very niche and would principally be for kids who have like a really intense interest in those subjects, and they can kind of fill their free spots with all of those weird and wonderful combinations of like law and anthropology and linguistics. And by the way, quickly on the subject of linguistics, I think linguistics would also serve the purpose of kind of being something of like an avenue for kind of retaining the language knowledge, because obviously, there was, the kids learn language at a very young age. And I like the idea of linguistics kind of being like, it's teaching about linguistics itself, language is like how it works and the kind of study of language, but also kind of in the background being like, okay, and also let's try and remind everybody of the language they've learned. I'm not sure if that's practical though, because I think actually, like retaining a language, I don't think it's something that can be taught, so I'm not sure. I think it would be nice if you could try and make the linguistics work with that kind of like language retention thing. Not sure if that's great. However, aside from all of those kind of like very specific topics, which I kind of already mentioned, which again, you'd have to learn some of it, but you really don't have to learn all of it. There are some ones which I think would be very kind of like much more substantially mandatory. And these were the ones that, of course, mandatory when I was in school. And that's geography, for example, which would require children to choose quite a lot of the different modules for it. And these would be modules both covering kind of the physical and the human. And there are loads of modules for geography. There's like rivers and Arctic and mountains and deserts. I think there's like a thing, basically, the way it works currently, actually, is that your teachers will choose different modules you do. So, for example, I did deserts, but I know that there are actually other people who did rainforests, and we never did rainforests. So the thing is, there's so many different things that you can be doing with geography that you're not going to pick all of them. So I like the idea you just pick some. I should mention, by the way, I'm just going to mention it here casually. I think that schools should have a lot more students in them. Like the average school size or student body size should increase dramatically to allow for more variability. Because of course this would be very difficult. It's just like a school of 100 people. Well, how are you going to have all this variability? Because you'd have like each class would only have like one person in it. So that's just a quick thing to bear in mind. But yeah, I think geography should have that system. Theology also, which of course would be religious education when I was at school. And I think that it should require kids to kind of familiarize themselves with the basic world religions, which is kind of how it works. So you'd have like one quick module on Hinduism, on Taoism, and all this other kind of stuff. But then if they find a religion really interesting, they could do like a full-on Bible study course on it, Like, it can get a lot more involved. So again, there's like that expectation where you have to do at least some of it. And, maybe not every single world religion. Maybe there's, again, a degree to which you can kind of pick it. You can be like, hey, do you want to do Confucianism or Taoism or both? If you just, so you have to do one or the other, but if you want to, you can do both. If you're really into religion and kind of theology, you can do both. And yeah, obviously, yeah. So maybe, for example, with Christianity, because this is a Christian country, I am fine with kind of the idea of Christianity getting more attention, especially as Christianity is also nominally the largest religion. You might even have, like, for example, you have to do a course on some aspect of the Bible. So it might be the prophets or the gospels or the epistles, something like that. And similarly with politics and economics, again, there would be the basic thing of like familiarizing with the broad ideas. But again, if you really want to specialize, you can. So kind of similar to the religion thing, you get like a broad overview, but if you want to specialize, you can. Now, history is the really interesting one, the one that's going to get the majority of focus that's left in the video. And that's because I actually broke down all of the different modules myself for kind of like an overview purpose. And I actually came up with, and you ready for this? 13 modules on the British history. And that includes things like the Plantagenets, the Victorians, World War II, Saxon Britain, the Stuarts, so on. 12 modules on Western European history. So that's things like the Holy Roman Empire, fractured Italy when Italy was city-states, Prussian ascendance, the rise of fascism, things like that. 16 modules on Eastern European history. So that's things like the medieval Balkans, the Russian Empire, the Yugoslav wars, Judaism and Zionism, which I'm counting as like Eastern European because I know that there was like the majority of like the Jewish population I feel like lived in kind of Eastern Europe, and I'm counting Israel as kind of Eastern Europe unofficially because it's like European kind of culturally, whatever. It's my divisions. 17 on kind of the Middle East and North Africa, so that's West African kingdoms, the late Ottoman Empire, the Iran's road to revolution, rise of Arab nationalism, all that kind of stuff. 5 on sub-Saharan Africa, so that's things like early African history, African colonization, African colonization, modern East Africa, modern Southern Africa. I might as well just say the last one, modern West Africa. And you may notice that's not very much, but the thing is, again, is kind of about like, obviously you can get really into the specifics, but the reality is that consider how much of like Western European history is being compressed by just splitting, all of that history into just 12 different categories. Yeah, or 12 different modules. Yeah, it kind of makes sense that the comparatively kind of sparse history of sub-Saharan Africa also has to get compressed. I don't think there's really an issue there. There are 10 on North America, and that's, early European settlement, American westward expansion, American industry, America in the Cold War, blah, blah, blah. 5 on Latin America. So Latin America also gets condensed. There's pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, pre-Columbian South America, Iberian empires. That's obviously when Spain and Portugal were dominant. independence and revolutions, and in modern Latin America. Again, not so much history there because, to be honest, Latin America has kind of a reputation for sitting out of world events quite a bit. Then you get East Asia, 16 modules for that. And that's got Dawn of Imperial China, the Mongolian Empire, the post-Mongol Khanates, the Rising Sun of Japan, China in Transition, so on and so forth, Ancient Korea, all that kind of jazz, Korea divided, 1945 to present. 12 modules on South Asia, featuring things like Vietnam and its rivals, French Indochina, Ancient India, the Gupta Empire, colonial India, so on and so forth. 5 on Oceania, that's Polynesia and colonialism, the East Indies, Australasian colonization, Australia and New Zealand, and modern Oceania. And then 20 on ancient Near East and Europe. So we got things like the Old Kingdom of Egypt, Bronze Age Western Europe, Kingdom of Israel, Late Period Egypt, Achaemenid Empire, Macedonian Empire, Sassanid Empire, and it all, of course, ends with the fall of the Roman Empire. So basically, that's it. And I decided to have that as its own separate section. So that is the different history modules. So the thing is, though, for every single one of those modules, if a kid wants to get deeper into it, there would be more detailed modules within those. So those are kind of like almost the overview modules. But obviously, when you look at Iran's road to revolution, for example, well, there's going to be like specific courses even within that. Of course, when you look at early history in sub-Saharan Africa, there could be a whole course on Great Zimbabwe if you want to learn about that. So as things get more specific, there could be more options for more details. I didn't want to go into all of that because these are kind of like, this is like, I guess, an overview of world history situation where, again, the implication or expectation would be that you would take enough of those courses to have a basic understanding of some parts of world history. And then on top of that, you would then have kids be expected to take some other courses to understand topics in more detail. So it'd be like you take kind of broad topics and then some other things where it's like, okay, but now you need to understand some stuff in even more detail to kind of get to that extra level of history where you're really looking into the specifics of certain things. And also in a kind of the like Key Stage 2, before Key Stage 3, there would be an attempt to kind of like teach world history just more generally, because Key Stage 2 will be before kids get to make a decision. So before kids get to make a decision, you just teach them kind of everything in broad terms so they can kind of then go back to it and look at it in more detail later on. And I think there should probably be, like, for the older kids, a unit that just goes through world history, like in 7 lessons. Just one module, world history, 7 lessons. It would be a challenge, but it would be, I think possible. I don't mention teachers anywhere here, but I should just say briefly, I think, like, while there can be teachers for this, I think that there should be readily available kind of lectures that anybody can watch, so they can just do any of these modules themselves if they like. But yeah, I also think there should be kind of extra modules on Europe at war, covering the Crusades, 30 Years' War, 7 Years' War, Napoleonic Wars, Revolution of 1848, First World War, and Second World War. And finally, kind of like topical modules on like social issues like gender and sexuality and race, and also maybe on things like the history of medicine and history of music and all that kind of stuff. I do want to just slide in like a cheeky thing about slavery, which is that a while ago I made a video where I basically said I didn't really trust non-white people to have a fully kind of balanced understanding of curriculum reform. Because I said that like one of the goals of Black Lives Matter in the UK was curriculum reform. And I said I was a bit suspicious about how like even-handed they would be. And I bring that up because I want to talk about what I think would be like a good module on slavery. And I think it should be called, you ready for this? Europe and the Abolition of Slavery. And the reason I think it should be called that is because I think that we should have a module that basically acknowledges Europe's role in slavery, but also acknowledges Europe's role in ending slavery, and should accurately contextualize Europe's role in slavery within the wider story of Europe's tremendous role in ending slavery across the globe. And it should. So the thing is, right now, it seems like certainly the way I was taught about slavery at school is it's like Western Europe slavery that it wrought upon Africa. When really, if we're being honest, the way slavery should be taught is the West African institution of slavery featuring Europe. You know? Like, because that's what it is, really. Like, the Europeans just, like, this slavery was all going on in West Africa. The Europeans showed up. And slavery is still going on in West Africa. So I think that we should be honest and say, well, what is the story of Europe and slavery? It's the story of slavery being ended. And that's why I think it just makes sense to say that. And the thing about it is I actually think that nobody could complain about this, because I don't think that the kind of right-wing people who might be against this kind of stuff could complain, because it's showing how Europe ended slavery. It's like a very positive kind of, saying Europe ended slavery, slavery exists in Africa. It's being honest about all this stuff. But I also don't really think that the kind of Black Lives Matter people could complain that much, because the reality of slavery is being acknowledged. Like, this isn't going to deny the negative effects of slavery. It's not going to deny the economic benefits of slavery that Europe got. It's actually, the thing is, it's just going to be accurate. And I don't actually think that many people would object to accuracy. I think most people say, yeah, that's the fair treatment. I think, the reality is I do worry when I see like Black Lives Matter being like, we need curriculum reform about slavery. I kind of expect they're going to be like, we need to make it so that everybody learns just how terrible Europe was and just spreading slavery all over the world or something like that. And it's like, but that's not accurate. So yeah, I said that, this is just like a cheat. I said this wasn't going to be about kind of identity politics at all. And I just thought I'd sneak a cheeky bit in there because I wasn't sure how else I'd ever say this. But obviously the point is, this isn't really about identity politics. It's just about truth. But anyway, the point is that there will be in conclusion, there will be a somewhat kind of, for history, a somewhat complicated web of different options, but it will be about making it so people can do what's kind of interesting for them and kind of explore all the different topics. And in conclusion, the whole thing with humanities would be about finding a balance between expecting the kids to learn some basic stuff about the world and society, while also giving an option for them to specifically look at what's interesting for them. So kids would learn like some basic philosophy, linguistics, all that kind of stuff, but also be able to say, well, this is what's very interesting for me. And just for the record, there should be 1,260 hours in Key Stage 3 available for humanities, which translates to 180 different modules. So in those 3 years, kids could do 180 different things. I'm not sure about Key Stage 4, because it's at that point people might put more or less focus on humanities, because at that point they can start kind of like taking a focus away from some other stuff or putting some focus on stuff. Like people be like, I want to do more science or more computing or whatever else. So it might be that they're doing less humanities, but if they say I want to do less computing or less science, they might put more focus on humanities. Oh, actually, I did write a section about teaching, and I just said I think there should be a mix of kind of edutainment videos explaining stuff and teachers kind of leading discussions about things like, what do you think about this, blah, blah, blah. I also, by the way, did mention in my university video that people should have the option of kind of exploring different courses for themselves and self-teaching themselves. And I think that should definitely be strongly open and considered and available. So let's conclude, because I am about to run out of battery again. Oh my lord, this has been so long. Okay, here's the thing. We're forcing kids to be in school. We should be trying to teach them good stuff. We should be trying to teach them stuff worth learning. And it's worth taking seriously this question of what should the curriculum be? It's worth making sure they're actually learning something that has a point and is going to educate them and grow their mind and expand their mind and just fix everything and make them better. So that's the end of the video, which it probably wasn't a long video because this is actually going to be part 2. I've decided now I'm going to split it into 2 parts. But goodness me, was this a long recording session.